Sayın Vali Yardımcım, Sayın Belediye Başkanım, Sabancı Vakfı Mütevelli Heyet Başkanı Sayın Güler Sabancı, değerli konuklar, basınımızın saygıdeğer üyeleri. Sabancı Vakfı'nın düzenlediği hibe programlarıyla fark yaratma seminerimize hoş geldiniz. Geçen sene uzman konuşmacılarımızla birlikte vakıf sektöründeki fırsatları, gelişmeleri ve yeni uygulamaları tartışmıştık. Dünyadaki vakıfların en önemli uygulamalarından biri olan hibe programları, İngilizce olarak grant programs diye geçiyor, tartışmanın önemli bir parçasıydı. Bu seneki seminerimizin ana konusu da hibe programları olarak belirledik. Bu konunun genelde Türkiye'de üçüncü sektörün geleceği için, özelde Sabancı Vakfı için çok önemli bir konu olduğunu düşünüyoruz. Bugün hibe programlarının toplumsal gelişme yönünde yarattığı farkı konuşuyor olacağız. Vakıflar neden bu uygulamayı kullanıyor, nasıl hayata geçiriliyor, unsurları ve kritik başarı faktörleri nelerdir, ne tür sonuçlar verebiliyor, etkisi nasıl ölçülüyor? Ve belki de en önemlisi, Türkiye'deki vakıflar bu araç ile insanların hayatında nasıl bir fark yaratabilir? Seminerimizde bugün dünya çapında uzman ve önde gelen fikir liderleri olan iki konuşmacımız bu konular hakkında görüşlerini bizimle paylaşacaklar. Çok sevdiğim ve saydığım meslektaşlarım, Küresel Kadın Fonu, Global Fund for Women Başkanı ve CEO'su Kavita Ramdas ve Civicus Onursal Başkanı Kumi Naidu, Kaliforniya'dan, Johannesburg'dan engin bilgilerini, tecrübelerini bizimle paylaşmak üzere ülkemize geldikleri için Sabancı Vakfı adına tekrar teşekkürlerimi sunuyorum. Bu sabah programımızın akışı şöyle olacak. Sayın Güler Sabancı, açılış konuşmasından sonra değerli konuşmacılarımızı sizlere takdim edeceğim. Kendileri yaklaşık 20 dakikalık birer sunuş yapacaklar. Kısa bir aradan sonra üçümüz söyleşi formatında açık bir tartışmaya geçeceğiz. Son 30 dakikada soru cevap için ayıracağız. Şimdi Sabancı Vakfı Mütevelli Heyet Başkanı Sayın Güler Sabancı'yı açılış konuşmasını yapmak üzere sahneye davet ediyorum.
Değerli vakıf ve sivil toplum temsilcileri, saygıdeğer konuklar, değerli misafirler, basının değerli üyeleri, Sabanci Center'a ve Sabancı Vakfı seminerlerimizin ikincisine hoş geldiniz. Hepinize katılımınızdan dolayı Sabancı Vakfı adına sonsuz teşekkürlerimi sunuyorum. Geçen yıl biraz önce Filiz'in de bahsettiği gibi dünyada vakıfların değişen rolünü burada hep beraber dinlemiştik. İki önemli konuşmacımız vardı. Ford Vakfı Emekli Başkanı Barry Gaberman ve Alman Marshall Vakfı Başkanı Greg Kennedy ile vakıf sektöründe gelişen akımları, yeni eğilimleri konuşmuştuk. Bugün aramızda yine çok önemli iki sivil toplum uzmanı var. Civicus Dünya Sivil Katılım Topluluğu Onursal Başkanı Kumi Naidu ve Küresel Kadın Fonu Başkanı ve CEO'su Kavita Ramdas. Kendilerine bir kez daha teşekkür ediyorum bugün buraya geldikleri ve bizlerle deneyimlerini paylaşacakları için. Bu yılki seminerimizin konusunu hibe programları ile fark yaratmak olarak belirledik. Kendileriyle dünyada gelişmekte olan hibe programlarının toplumsal gelişmedeki rolünü ve yarattığı değişimleri tartışacağız. Değerli konuklar, bugün mal varlığı ve sayısız hayır yatırımlarıyla Türkiye'nin en büyük vakıflarından biri olarak görülen 34 yıldır hizmet veren Sabancı Vakfı, sivil toplum sektöründeki gelişme ve dünyadaki değişimlerden hareketlerle başlattığımız stratejik çalışmasını tamamladı. Bu çalışmalar sonucunda Sabancı Vakfı'nın geleceğe taşıyacak yeni program alanları olarak, yani odaklanacağımız konular olarak kadınlar, gençler ve engelliler olarak belirledik. Mevcut alanlarımızı geliştirmeye devam ederken, yani üniversitemiz, burs programlarımız gibi mevcut klasik yapmakta olduğumuz işlerimize aynen devam ederken, yeni uygulamalarımızı ve programlarımızı belli bir strateji çerçevesinde geliştirmek istiyoruz. Bu kapsamda program alanlarımızı ve hedef kitlelerinin sorunlarını dikkate alıyoruz. Bütün çabamız yarınlarını değiştirme gücüne sahip olanlara cesaretlendirmek ve teşvik etmek ve dolayısıyla da insanların hayatlarında kalıcı fark yaratabilmek. Vakfımızın bu dönemde üstlendiği yeni rollerden biri de toplumsal gelişmeye destek olacağına inandığımız hibe programları. Vakfımız, kadınlar, gençler ve engellilere yönelik projeler için toplumsal gelişme hibe programlarını başlattı. Bu kapsamda sürdürülebilir ve çarpan etkisi olan projelere toplam 1 milyon YTL tutarında hibe vereceğiz. Bunlarla ilgili bu programlara müracaat için 20 Kasım'da açtık müracaatları. 20 Ocağı kadar devam ediyor. Ben buradan bir kez daha sivil toplum örgütlerine, üniversitelere ve değerli temsilcilerine çağrıda bulunmak istiyorum. 20 Ocağı kadar lütfen Sabancı Vakfı'nın web sitesinden ulaşabilirsiniz, detayları öğrenebilirsiniz, toplumsal hibe programlarımıza başvurabilirsiniz. Değerli misafirler, sivil toplum alanındaki gelişmelerin ve yaratıcı uygulamaların siz değerli hayır işleriyle ilgili kişi ve kurumlar ile paylaştığımız ve paylaşmakta yarar gördüğümüz bu konferans serilerini bu sene ikincisini yapıyoruz. Sabancı Vakfı seminerlerinin bundan sonra gelenekselleşeceğine inanıyorum. Siz değerli konukları da her sene burada hep beraber olmaktan büyük mutluluk duyacağız. Hibe programları ile fark yaratmak konusunda ve bu konuda tartışmak üzere toplantımız başlıyor. Ben bir kez daha hepinize bugüne katıldığınız için teşekkür ederken ayrıca hepinizin şahsında sivil topluma yapmakta olduğunuz katkılar için bir vatandaş olarak hepinize tekrar çok teşekkür ediyorum.
Şimdi değerli konuşmacılarımızı sizlere takdim etmek üzere sahneye davet edeceğim. Kavita Ramdas, uluslararası kadın hakları alanında dünyanın en büyük ve en fazla miktarda hibe veren 21 milyon Amerikan doları mal varlığı olan, her katıda binlerce kadın sivil toplum kuruluşuna verilen 8 milyon dolarlık hibeyi yöneten, konusunun dünya çapında uzmanı ve çok sayıda ödül sahibi olan Küresel Kadın Fonu Başkanı ve CEO'su Sayın Kavita Ramdas'ı sahneye davet etmek istiyorum. Dünyanın en büyük uluslararası sivil toplum ağının 10 yıl süreyle liderliğini yapan, sivil toplum ve yoksulluk çalışmalarının en bilinen isimlerinden, ayrıca Birleşmiş Milletler eski dönem Genel Sekreteri Kofi Annan tarafından Birleşmiş Milletler Sivil Toplum İlişkileri Kurulu'na seçilen Civicus Onursal Başkanı Kumi Naidu'yu sahneye davet etmek istiyorum. Evet, tekrar hoş geldiniz. Seminerin bu kısmından itibaren ana dilim İngilizce'ye döneceğiz. Welcome again, Kumi and Kavita. We won't be needing translation any longer. I'll be speaking in our common language. But we might want to turn that off so it doesn't distract you. So without further ado, we're going to move into your remarks. But before that, I just want to say a few words about what Kumi and Kavita have come to share with us today. As I explained in my opening remarks, Kumi represents an organization called Civicus, and they focus on 4 things in the world, very briefly, first, under the mission of acting together for a just world: social justice, economic justice, civic justice, and political justice. Under these 4 themes, they organize and network hundreds of nonprofit organizations and civil society organizations every year in a huge assembly. They run programs called Civil Society Watch to make sure in different parts of the world that civil society has the space to contribute to their own societies. So today, in Kumi's remarks, we'll be listening to his perspective on the global agenda as someone who's been actively involved with UN discussions, World Bank civil society discussions. Kumi is a very, very valuable leader in the sector and has the opportunity to tell us a little bit about the big picture, why we're worried about poverty and climate change and development. And then we'll move on to Kavita, who will kind of bring it down to us for the local level, specifically focusing on women's organizations and what it means to be a funder, both a fundraiser and a grant maker, the unique model of the Global Fund for Women, and talk about some of the challenges that they face in connecting the local issues to the global issues. So, Kumi, please, yes.
Teşekkürler, please. Günaydın, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends. Those of you who are wondering why I came all the way from South Africa to be on this panel, the answer is very simple. The Sabanci Foundation needed to have gender balance on this panel. The first time I came to Turkey in 1999 was for a conference organized by TUSEV, which had the involvement of the president of the country and so on, was to speak about what was happening around the world, which at that time in the early 90s, or the late 90s, was called an associational revolution was happening. That was citizens with forming organizations, non-profit groups to address their various challenges. And it was also a time when there were still many questions about whether government, business, and what we call civil society, which includes non-profit organizations, foundations, religious groups, trade unions, and so on. There was a big question then about whether, in fact, we can learn to work together with each other, because today we live in a world where it's become completely clear that government alone cannot address all the problems that humanity faces. Foundations and non-profit organizations alone cannot do so on their own, and neither can business. And unless we can focus on the comparative advantages of the different sectors in society, and unless we can better understand how we can harness the comparative advantages for social progress, we will not get too far. However, in those days, there were still very many questions about whether we could work, and I want to share with you that late in the evening, after the conference was over, there was a bunch of us at the hotel, some from outside, some from inside, and there was somebody was saying, you know, NGOs, which is a term that's used globally, non-governmental organizations are really important, and kept talking NGOs, and a business person said, what is this thing you're talking about, NGO, you know, haven't quite heard of it before. And the non-profit sector person that I was with said, you haven't heard of it about NGOs? Well, to understand NGOs is very easy. All you have to do is understand Christopher Columbus, he said. Because when Christopher Columbus set out, he didn't know exactly where he was going. When he arrived, he didn't know exactly where he was. When he got back, he didn't know exactly where he had been. However, he had a huge impact on the world, and he did it all on somebody else's money. So today we are living in a world where there's a lot of fluidity, a lot of change, a lot of uncertainty. But while we talk and gather here at a time where everybody is focused on the global financial crisis, it's worth taking a lesson from China, because the character for crisis is the same character, the alphabet. The same character for crisis is the same character for opportunity. And the challenge for all of us who are concerned about moving this world such that it's more equitable, more just, and more fair is to understand this moment in a way that actually we can, out of the desperation and uncertainty that we feel, how can we learn from it and move the whole planet in a different direction? My dear brothers and sisters, the reality is today and every single day, 50,000 men, women, and children die from preventable causes. 50,000 men, women, and children every single day. On my continent, Africa alone, every day we lose 6,000 people from HIV/AIDS alone, 7,000 people from malaria alone, and 1,500 people from tuberculosis alone. What is happening in some parts of the world is not simply a sad situation, a problem, or a tragedy. It is actually a passive genocide or a daily silent tsunami that is underway. Now, those of us who might not live in countries where we have those kinds of statistics, it's important for us to recognize that the slogan that was prevalent in the early 1990s, which said, think globally, act locally. Can I just check, is that a slogan that any of you have heard? Think globally, act locally. And what was behind that slogan was, irrespective of what issue you were trying to tackle at the local or national level within your own country, you needed to better understand how global institutions, global processes, and global discourse and ideas have an impact on what you can or cannot achieve at the national or local level. However, one of the ironies of the moment of world history that we are living in is that precisely at a time in many countries, including my own South Africa, and the successor states of the former Soviet Union, for example, we're getting formal democracy for the first time. Real power on many issues was shifting from the national to the global levels. So today in Turkey, you can't wake up one day, government, business, and civil society, and say, we're going to address climate change. You can't address it as a national issue. These issues can only be addressed with the global community coming together. Similarly, you can't address the issue of environmental, other environmental catastrophes. Even an issue like HIV/AIDS today is because the pricing of life-saving pharmaceutical drugs is negotiated at a global level. That is also, the solutions also have a global dimension to it. So you can't see it solely as a national issue. So today, we also have to think locally and act globally if indeed that is where the solutions to our various challenges actually lie. At this point, though, I really would like to ask your indulgence and say to you that today is the 1st of December, and the 1st of December is World AIDS Day. And I'd like to just ask you to all stand for 30 seconds and maintain a moment of silence in memory of the tens of millions of people who have died already from HIV/AIDS and the close to 7 to 8 million people that will die today from the HIV/AIDS pandemic. So if I can just ask you to please stand and just maintain a 30-second silence in memory of those folks who have died and those that will die in the coming days and months. Thank you very much. This particular seminar is taking place at a very special moment, actually, because today is World AIDS Day. In Doha, at the moment, there's a big world conference going on financing for development that is looking at how we can ensure that we find the resources to address poverty and other pressing issues. Today also in Poznan in Poland, over the next 12 days, starts the climate change negotiations in preparation for the post-Kyoto conference next year. And importantly, all of this is happening at a particular moment in world history where there's a lot of anxiety. I want to just pick up on a few issues quickly. Whether a society can form foundations and non-profit organizations and so on has not been a given. And as we've seen since my first visit to Turkey in 1999, there has been so many positive developments like the associational law in 2004, the foundations law in early this year. And you can see that there is a real effort. And I want to commend and welcome that, and to say that that has been a global trend over the last 10 to 15 years. However, it's just important to note one negative trend, and that is the tragedy of September 11, 2001, which the whole world stood in solidarity with the people in the United States. Sadly, the response to September 11, 2001, through the so-called war on terrorism, we have seen in many countries around the world, in the name of the war on terror, there has been a clamping down on space for non-profit organizations. And I want to tell you this in a story. About 18 months ago, in a country called Zimbabwe, which I'm sure many of you have heard of because it's been in the news very sadly over the last couple of years, Civicus had been called in to support the religious community and civil society who were concerned and raising issues about the state of democracy in Zimbabwe. And as has happened in the past, we were followed by security police agents. And after a few minutes, I went up to one of them and started a conversation and said, here's the card, here's the brochure, this is what we're here for, nothing secretive. And the person, two guys started talking, and then they said, well, democracy in Zimbabwe is not perfect, but why is Civicus and other human rights organizations putting so much of pressure on us when we in Zimbabwe didn't do Abu Ghraib torture, we are not running Guantanamo Bay, we are not engaged in racial and religious profiling, we are not like the UK government trying to pass a new detention without trial law and so on. So I'm giving you that to say that really we must not take the space for civil society to be able to function in its various manifestations for granted, even in countries that claim to be promoters of democracy. That democracy is a central, important factor to ensure that the ability of citizens to take private action for public good is actually there, is not something we should ever take for granted, because as Kavita will tell you, the Patriot Act, for example, in the United States has also put restrictions on the functioning of foundations. Thankfully, though, from 20th of January next year, when President Obama is inaugurated, there are many of us in civil society, particularly from Africa and the developing world, and I'm sure not too dissimilar in this part of the world, have been saying, well, we hope that from next year onwards we can dream of a world of much, much more trees and perhaps a little less bush. I want to go to the question then, how does change happen, and how does foundations in particular, through grant-making programs within this kind of global context, work to actually effect change? The sad reality is that a lot of foundations around the world are put under pressure for a whole range of reasons to show quick returns on investments. So if we look today at where the resources of foundations and the organizations that they support, the various non-profit organizations that they support, you will find that still about 90% of the resources approximately goes into delivering of services, that is providing direct support for people in need. A little less goes to, and the remainder goes to trying to support non-profit organizations that are trying to change a particular policy, and even less goes towards trying to reforming governance arrangements that might exist in society. So I want to take an example of another moment that we're in, because we are also in what is called the 16 Days of Activism, a United Nations globally sort of sponsored event, the 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence, which started on the 25th and ends on International Human Rights Day on the 10th of December. So I want to use an example to make this point, given the focus of the Sabanci Foundation on women, youth, and people living with disabilities. And I want to take the issue of domestic violence. So as a foundation, how do you try to make a difference? So, for example, There's lots of important work that women's organizations are doing, working with survivors of domestic violence, for example. So providing resources for shelters and refuges, but also counseling for women who have survived domestic violence. These are important investments that need to be made. However, if you take all the work that foundations are supporting in domestic violence and beyond, and think that tomorrow all the gods that we believe in comes down to earth and say, every foundation and every non-profit organization, I'm going to give you a 5,000% increase in your budget, right? If you can imagine this being a baseline, we would go from reaching this number of people to reaching that number of people when the need will be there. So the point I'm making is putting all our eggs solely in the delivery of services without understanding how that delivery of services can have an impact on policy and so on won't get us too far. So in the area of domestic violence, for example, or violence against women, doing that I mentioned of refuge counseling, of course is important. But unless we look at the policy level and ask ourselves, is there a domestic violence act that's recognized as policy that promotes, that protects women in their homes? Is there work to ask why do men abuse and try to look at dealing with the question of how masculinity is constructed and so on? Unless we do that and try to engage in the policy level on any issue that foundations are supporting, we would only get so far. But I come from South Africa, and if I just take a youth example, in the old days, during the apartheid system, trying to intervene only in policy will also only get you so far. Because, you know, if I went to lobby the apartheid government and said, you know, you need to change your policy on education, you only can go so far when the entire governance arrangement was actually undemocratic and flawed. So today, the strategic choices that foundations must make, and I'm not making a value judgment of saying that delivery is more important than policy, is more important than governance. I think all are important. But I think if foundations are committed to making lasting, fundamental, sustainable change, and the key word here is sustainable, because it's very easy to start a project and support an organization, and it runs for 2 years or 3 years, and then it collapses once the resources dry up. So thinking about how we do this requires a thoughtful, strategic set of choices about how you actually support delivery, policy change, as well as governance changes where it's necessary. I want to commend the Sabanci Foundation, though, about the way it has framed its current grant-making program, and just outline a few things that I think you should look at very closely for those of you outside of the foundation as a resource and for inspiration. The one important thing is it draws on one of the wisdoms actually from the women's movement, and my apologies to the interpreters because this is a wonderful idea from the women's movement, but a terrible word. And the word is intersectionality. This word intersectionality, basically the women's movement had to say, this is our issue of advancing women's rights, but we need to understand how this intersects with young people, with the issues of race, with the issues of class, and so on. And what I like so much reading the program is, one, you've chosen socially excluded groups, women, young people, and people living with disability. So that is a target constituency that sadly is often neglected. And I just want to make one point. The term social exclusion that is used in European Union discourse and literature, importantly, whenever they talk about social exclusion, it's talked about as if it's minorities of citizens. But actually, if you add them up, you know, they think, well, social exclusion are minorities, you know, people with disabilities, people living with HIV/AIDS, people living with terminal diseases and so on. But if you had all those numbers up, and if you add women, you had young people, you have older people, because in many societies, we also marginalize older persons. And then suddenly you actually, when you add it all up, you suddenly say, actually, you're talking about a majority of citizens. So that's the one thing that I want to strongly encourage and urge all of you to look at. The second is the way that we are saying, when you're dealing with your youth program, also look at what's the gender dimensions to it, what are the people living with disability dimensions and so on. But I want to challenge you to go a little further, and that is, when you look at all three of those programs today, I think you also need to be looking at, well, when you say employment is one of the key things that you're concerned about generally, which again should be commended, does then a challenge to you that you need to understand what are the trade negotiations, what are the climate change developments, what are the broader issues in society. So I think today the challenge that we have is to be looking at a range of external factors as well, and to look at how it intersects. So, for example, you can't ignore all the stuff going on about accession to the European Union. That has implications of how you can actually affect your different programs. And just if I can make a naughty remark as I begin to round up, I've been following the whole accession talks. I've come to the conclusion the European Union probably needs Turkey much more than Turkey needs the European Union. So I want to end with this point, that we are living at a moment in history where we are either going to make a set of choices that moves us down a line and a road of greater sustainability, greater equality, greater justice, and hopefully allows us to give to future generations a world that they would be happy to inherit. However, there are tough choices ahead of us. And in our small way, in our different countries, in our different communities, we have a responsibility to ensure that we begin to question the paradigms and the frameworks that we have accepted as given. We have to think about how do we equip our citizens to be able to understand the changes that are happening in their country, in the world, and what impacts they have on their lives, and to empower them to be able to actually deal with those changes. And here I want to quote, share with you a quick proverb, which many of us take as a God-given fact. It goes like, if you teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. If you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. How many of you have heard that and think that's a really good proverb? All of you. Okay, now here's the thing. That is a paradigm that we all have accepted for a long time, I also. And somebody from the World Bank came to a Civicus conference and challenged that proverb in 1999. And it was quite amazing, somebody from the World Bank coming and challenging a thing that all civil society people felt very strongly. He said, and I quote, if you teach a man to fish, does he today have access to resources to buy the fishing rod and other fishing implements to actually engage in the act of fishing? If you teach a man to fish, does he have access to unpolluted stocks of water where there are fish that are edible that you can actually fish in? If you teach a man to fish, does it get to anybody else in the family or it stays with the man? And this person jokingly said, and we asked the question whether poor like fish to start off with. My friends in the women's movement say they like this proverb because they say if you teach a man to fish, at least we'll have a peaceful weekend to ourselves. But the point is, something like that was a given. It's good that we have to start challenging some of the things that we've given and try to imagine a world that is very different. So let me conclude by saying that in the work that all of you do, I'm sure that there are times when you feel despondent and you feel, does my investment, does my effort actually make a difference? And I want to leave you with a story which is very personal. It's about my best friend whose name is Lenny Naidu. When we were 22 years old, we were both activists in Nelson Mandela's movement for democracy in South Africa, and we were fleeing into exile. And Lenny, who was a very special person, vegetarian and pacifist and so on, asked me a question. He said, Kumi, what is the biggest contribution that any one of us can make to the cause of humanity? And I said, that's a simple question. It's giving your life. He said, you mean going out, participating in a democracy demonstration and being shot and killed and becoming a martyr? I said, I guess so. And he said, that's the wrong answer. He said, it's not giving your life, but giving the rest of your life. I was 22 years old that time. I didn't know what he was talking about, to be honest. But a year later, while I was in exile at Oxford University, I got a telephone call telling me that my friend Lenny and 3 young women from my home city were brutally murdered by the apartheid regime. There were so many bullets in their bodies, their parents couldn't recognize them at the mortuary. And I had to think deeply about that conversation, the very last one I had with him before we went into exile in different ways. What he was saying was the struggle for youth empowerment, gender equality, ending global poverty, for genuine democracy, and so on. These struggles are a marathon, they're not a sprint. And those of us, like all of us in this room and all the institutions that are represented here today, who have had an opportunity and a privilege to be involved in public service, need to recognize that the biggest contribution we can make is a lifetime of commitment until these issues are actually addressed. And the thing that I say to young people, and I do a lot of work with young people in my role at Civicus, I say to young people, we must break the idea about understanding patriotism as dying for your country. We must build a new understanding where patriotism is about living for your country and living in a way that creates equality, fairness, and to ensure that this planet that we have can be equitably shared by all the citizens that are part of global humanity. Thank you very much.
I first met Kumi in 2004 at a Civicus conference in Botswana, my first time in Africa and my first time at a Civicus event. And I have to say, it's been, 4 years now, and I've heard Kumi speak 1 or 2 other times in different events, and each time I feel like I'm listening to him for the first time, because as someone who actually works in this sector and is, I guess, dedicating my life to this kind of change, the words are inspirational, the perspective of the global issues so important to the work that we're doing in Turkey. So thank you very much, Kumi, for once again another very inspiring speech and for reminding us of the big picture. Kavita, another part of the big picture, but somehow manages to reach local and act global at the same time. Probably one of your biggest challenges as well as your assets. Kavita will talk to us today about how grant making as an instrument can advance social development. Talking about the different forms of grant making. Kavita has a foundation background in the private foundation sector. And she also has a background with, obviously, the Global Fund for Women, and she's also on the advisory panel regarding global development at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So from very different places, she sits in a perspective to be able to share with us on what grant making really is and what kind of change it can help create. Just a few words about the Global Fund for Women and some of the issues they focus on. Actually parallel very much Civicus's overarching goals of civic, political, economic, and social justice. The Global Fund for Women has identified several areas: economic security, violence, education, health and safety, leadership, and 2 kind of hot topics, trafficking and empowerment. So through this way, Kavita will be sharing us some stories, some lessons learned, and examples about how the Global Fund for Women is creating change all over the world, including Turkey. So please.
Namaste and Assalamu alaikum. It's very nice to be here. I'm, like Kumi, very biased and fortunate visitor to Istanbul, which I consider to be one of the most beautiful cities in the world and one of the places I really somehow have a strange sense of feeling at home. Thank you for the shalwar kameez which you gave to our civilization, which we still wear. I'm really honored to be here among such a distinguished panel of speakers, and indebted to Felice for her invitation, indebted to the Sabanci Family Foundation, and to so many friends and supporters here. The Global Fund has had a long history of grant making to support women's rights organizations in Turkey, and Turkey is really fortunate to have very impressive and strong civil society organizations. So I think to start a grant making program here you are starting with an advantage that many different parts of the world would actually be envious of having a civil society that is actually so ready to participate in a grant-making program such as the one Sabanci is planning to launch. I would like to begin by asking for a little bit of your time to tell you a little bit about my own background, particularly as it relates to philanthropy. I was born and raised in India, which, like Turkey, has a long tradition of philanthropic giving, but in a different way. In a way primarily through religious traditions, either through temples or mosques, or like in Turkey, the Waqf. There are many traditions of giving which are not formalized in the sense that we understand them, certainly from my years of experience in the United States. It was not until I came to the United States in 1983 on a scholarship that I began to understand how philanthropy works in the USA. My scholarship to college was made possible because a number of individuals who had graduated from the same college had actually been making gifts and charitable contributions back to the college to a scholarship fund that enabled someone like me to come from another country who could not afford an education in the United States without that kind of assistance. My first job on the Mount Holyoke campus was calling to thank such graduates and donors or alumna to the college. They were interested to hear from me because I was the living impact of their grant making. So it made me have a different understanding of how to understand philanthropy. In 1988, after my graduate studies, I had the chance to work at a large grant-making foundation. Felice mentioned the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation in Chicago. There I learned how the tax code in the United States enables wealthy individuals to receive a tax break if they choose to establish a private foundation which gives away to worthwhile causes that advance the public good. It's a very interesting notion that private money can be used to advance a public good. At such foundations in the United States, the notion is that if you develop a few areas of focus in which you can improve or enhance the well-being of the public good, you can make a genuine contribution. Because in the United States, there's a strong value placed on citizen-led associations, actually going all the way back to de Tocqueville in the 18th century. He noticed that Americans really liked these civil associations of different kinds. There has been an understanding that citizen-led organizations play a strong role in democracies, and private foundations feel comfortable seeking their partnership in advancing the goals of their society through the mechanism of grant making. I thought for Sabanci Foundation, which has so much experience with scholarships, maybe I could make an analogy that in fact the process of running a grant-making program is not that different than applying for a scholarship. Organizations that seek to educate girls or improve the environment or advance the arts or plant more trees or provide legal aid to the poor write to private and public foundations in the United States describing how their programs and activities contribute to advancing a particular cause. The foundation, in turn, hires a fairly skilled set of staff who are mainly generalists, but who are also good analytical thinkers. You have Felice. To make assessments, to ask problems, and to kind of dig a little bit deeper into the ways in which those civil society organizations are planning to try and make a difference in the area that they have chosen. Then the staff recommends that set of groups that they believe most closely meet the criteria that they are seeking to have them live up to, and make that recommendation to a board of directors who finally approves it. This is not a dissimilar process to the one that we use at the Global Fund for Women, the place that I've worked at for the last 12 years. But what we have chosen to do is to make an impact in the area of advancing women's rights globally. As a public charity, that is, as an organization that we actually receive funding as well as make grants, we do not have any single wealthy benefactor or a single family that left us money in an endowment, but rather we raise all the money that we give away each year in grants to women's organizations around the globe. Of course, if you call yourself global, which the Global Fund for Women did in 1987 when we were founded, much before global became a fashionable word, it has a very, very large scope. So part of our challenge is you have to have a somewhat different approach to grant making. The Global Fund chose the grant making model because it believes that it is important for us to hear directly from the communities that we are seeking to serve about how they view priorities on the ground. So some of what Kumi was talking about, it is easy for us to sit in national and international meetings and to discuss what we think should happen for climate change or should happen for women's rights or should happen for democracy. But it is very different when you're actually living in a poor community without access to clean drinking water, without ability to raise your voice, in a society where women are not supposed to express any kind of opinion whatsoever. And making that connection is one of the big challenges for the Global Fund. And we believe that choosing to be a grant-making foundation allows us to hear the voices of those whom we might not otherwise have heard from, because they can tell us in their own words what are the challenges that they are facing and bring these very large concepts down to a very grounded place from where we can understand how to make a difference. We are interested at the Global Fund in learning from new approaches, and we also want to understand what is similar or might be different. How do women face certain struggles in Turkey that are very similar to women in Bolivia or Argentina, and how are they different and how are they unique? So our grant-making program has allowed women from around the world to speak to us in their own languages, to define their own agendas, and to offer and share their own analysis of the challenges that are facing them, and also to offer their best solutions for how we might be able to overcome these challenges. Particularly how they believe that these solutions can help them overcome the barriers of discrimination, violence, and poverty that face so many women and girls, particularly all over the world. For us at the Global Fund, it seems now like a given that we understand advancing women's rights, increasing women's access to technology, to education, to political participation, not only allows women to be a powerful force in the world, but also is one of the most effective ways to advance some of the other much larger global agendas that Kumi spoke to earlier. If you want to make a difference in health in the world, if you want to make a difference in water, if you want to make a difference in addressing HIV/AIDS, if you fail to include fully 50% of the world's population, you simply are not going to get the kinds of outcomes that you actually want to see. And more people are coming around to that position. The numbers and the statistics are speaking fairly loudly and clearly for themselves. When you ensure women's right to education, for example, child mortality drops significantly by 10% or more, and the risk of contracting HIV/AIDS drops by almost 50% if you can ensure that a woman has more than a 4th grade education. But for us, statistics are not enough. We are also making investments in women's courage, in women's expertise, in their tenacity, in their creativity, and in their leadership. Today, we raise about $10 million a year from over 15,000 individuals from 43 countries around the world. Individual donations make up about 48% of our revenue, foundations make up about 31%, and corporations about 6%. We don't take any government funding, in part because of what Kumi said. Because of being located in the United States, we have really resisted the connection with advancing a particular foreign policy of a given country at any time. One way of ensuring that we as an organization keep very focused on this mission is by looking at questions of governance. And I think that's an issue that maybe many foundations don't think about, but it is one that we need to think about. I serve, as Felice said, on the board of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which has only 3 people who serve on their board of directors: Bill, Melinda, and Warren Buffett. If you think about the contradiction between an entity that is a private entity and that has so much ability to influence the public good, and you think about the structures of accountability, how is it possible to have structures that allow a foundation like that to become more accountable to the communities that they are serving? In the Gates Foundation case, they are trying to do that by creating advisory panels, such as the one I now serve on, such as the one Kumi serves on, where they are bringing different voices to try and influence and educate and bring different perspectives. In the case of the Global Fund for Women, our board is more than 2/3 composed of women activists from different parts of the world who actually allow us to hear firsthand from their own experiences, what is it really like to challenge discrimination, or what is it like to live with a disability in a developing country, or what is it like to live in a country where the actual law discriminates against women or against young people. We've also created a network of advisors because we work globally, and we know that sitting in San Francisco or New York, you cannot possibly know how to do the right thing in Turkey or in India or in Botswana. Advisors who are based in their own countries on the ground, who can give us advice about what are the best ways in which to support civil society in their own countries, and also what are the challenges that local organizations face. They visit groups, they give us a sense of what groups are facing in their own context, and they make assessments about capacity. But how does one run a grant-making program that is effective around the globe? And how does one do it sort of in a really practical way? I want to share a few of our lessons. First, you have to be really clear about what is it that you are trying to do. If you are trying to strengthen women's voices, as we are, or if we are trying to ensure that we get money directly into the hands of women in their own communities, we have to be really clear in our own minds as a grant maker that that is what we want to do. Second, if we want to hear from groups on the ground, we must make it possible for them. So as Kumi said, if the man cannot reach the fish or cannot reach the pond where the fish are, you have to do something about that. So one way in which the Global Fund has done that is you can write to us in any language. Turkish grantees can write to us in Turkish. Groups from the Middle East can write to us in Arabic. Groups from India can write to us in Hindi. Groups from Afghanistan can write to us in Pashto. That might not seem like a big thing, but I think we are the only foundation in the United States that accepts applications in the language of the people who are applying themselves. If you're trying to reach out to people with disabilities and you don't accept an application that is written in Braille, what does it say about your intention to serve people with disabilities? Thirdly, you need to define some broad areas, and you heard Felice describe the ones that we are trying to see whether we can have some impact in: health, education, the environment, ending violence. And finally, we have to say to ourselves, are we as grant makers willing to take risks? And are we willing to put that out there, that we are willing to take those risks? Are we willing to invest in women who are really entrepreneurial and visionary, and therefore also sometimes controversial in the issues that they are taking on? Let me share 3 stories. In 1992, following on the heels of Tiananmen Square in China, a small group of women wrote to us saying they wanted to establish the first ever hotline for domestic violence in China. At the time, the issue of domestic violence was very hotly contested, and the Chinese government said it was a Western problem and did not exist in China. They received a $10,000 grant from the Global Fund for Women, and within the first 9 months, this hotline received over 3,000 phone calls. Today, they receive over 70,000 calls a year from women all over the country. What started as a hotline has grown to include educating women about laws that protect them and training community members to intervene to stop domestic violence. The hotline has been replicated in 17 cities across China and has forced the government to acknowledge the toll that domestic violence takes on public health, on economic productivity, and on community safety. This organization, Maple Women's Center, now leads national efforts to reform and propose legislation to protect women's rights. And in 2001, they succeeded in adding an anti-domestic violence clause to the marriage law in China, speaking to this connection Kumi was making between, on the one hand, providing the service, which was the hotline, and on the other hand, making the shift to impact policy and holding governments accountable for the responsibility that they actually have to take. We're also very proud, as I said earlier, to have supported groups here in Turkey. In 1995, we gave Women for Women Human Rights, led now by Pinar Ilakaran, $7,000, their first ever grant from any funder. Just one amongst many groups, as I said. They were researching women's rights in Turkey and violence against women in Ankara, Istanbul, Eastern and Southeastern Anatolia. They used our grant to do this research and learned that many women were unaware of the rights granted to them under Turkish law, and that there were virtually no women's grassroots organizing and networking other than in big cities in Turkey. So they decided to dedicate themselves to training Turkish women in legal literacy, reforming civil and penal codes to advance women's rights in Turkey and internationally. Since 1995, they've educated over 4,500 women on legal and economic rights in community centers that exist in 36 Turkish provinces. A recent external evaluation found that they were so effective that they had actually, Pinar and the Coalition for Sexual Bodily Rights in Muslim Societies won a prestigious international prize called the Gruber Women's Rights Prize for their groundbreaking leadership in reforming Turkish laws and advancing the rights of Muslim women. Pinar not only has served as a grantee of the Global Fund, but has now joined our advisory council and helps us to make good decisions on grants, not only the ones we make in Turkey, but also informs our grant making in other parts of the world. Lastly, I want to share a story with you about our work in funding women with disabilities. The Global Fund is actually one of the largest funders of women with disabilities around the world. Since the early 90s, we've made grants to groups of women with disabilities who face the double discrimination of being a woman in their society and the fear and ostracization that women with disabilities experience. We've not only made grants directly to groups of women with disabilities in countries as diverse as Pakistan, Egypt, Colombia, but also funded leadership training and awareness-raising efforts. And I want to end with a story from a gathering that I was at last year, a gathering called the Women's Institute on Leadership and Disability, where new and emerging grassroots women leaders from 30 different countries, speaking in 23 different languages, including sign language, were present at a training program to really develop the skills of women with disabilities. I don't know how many of you have ever been in a room like this, but if you can imagine, we were in a room where people were on wheelchairs, some people were both deaf, dumb, and blind. There was a woman from Botswana who was blind and had started a business of braiding hair in her village and was now one of the most skilled hairstylists in her village. They were learning not just to how to live with their disabilities and particularly to deal with violence, because women with disabilities are disproportionately subject also to sexual violence. So it was, watching them sort of saying no and resisting and learning the techniques. But also they are women who are leaders of the women's movements in their own countries. So it is not just a question of, oh, you living with a disability, maybe you can do something for people with disabilities. No, these are women who are actually leaders around issues like countries accepting CEDAW, the Convention for Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. These are leaders who are running for parliamentary office. These are leaders who are challenging their governments to actually live up to the conventions on human rights that they have actually signed, but have failed to actually implement. So I think, again, changing our own ideas about what it is when we understand investing in women who are making a difference. I'll share with you this one quote. They say, we should think beyond our atrophied legs. We should feel good about ourselves. Let us tell our story the way we are. We are loud, proud, and passionate. And this is the way in which they actually brought their energy and their work. In the following piece, I would like to be able to share some of what I both see as the challenges of being a grant-making organization, but also what I think are incredible opportunities to connect with people like this, both at the grassroots, but also people who have the vision and the ability to see how transformation at the local level can really have profound implications for transformative change at the global level. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kavita. Another inspiring presentation. There are so many lessons that you're sharing with, actually, in both of your speeches. I'm combining them by doing a quick summary, but advisory panels, working with experts, being able to see the big picture, but not at all forgetting the smaller picture, the local picture, keeping your ear to the ground, as they say, balancing investment in services such as buildings, institutions, and also thinking toward policy and systemic, long-term sustainable change. And just the impact that a small grant can make, and the story that you tell about Women's for Women Human Rights, the organization in Turkey, and how $7,000 can go to change so much, including the penal code in Turkey. So that's kind of something that really gets you thinking about impact and grant making. So I'd like to segue actually a little bit into that subject. Let's talk about impact. We've talked about, I think we've focused most of our discussions a little bit till now on agenda setting. So on these 2 points, one is how do we increase the impact that grant making can make? And by doing that, there seems to be this natural tension of global, local issues. And also, I was speaking with a colleague who's in the audience today working on education reform, and we were talking about foundations and their ability to either, or desire, to set the agenda or follow the agenda. So an example of setting the agenda for the Sabanci Foundation is thinking about women, youth, and persons with disabilities together and adding those lenses to each of those areas so that we're not excluding none of those groups within our work. But on the other hand, there is also an agenda of the country and its development plan and its plans going forward within the EU and certain democratization reforms. So how do you balance, as a grant maker, kind of the agenda that you're trying to set and the vision that you're trying to realize with what you're saying is sort of what's happening at the local level with the grassroots communities? And then kind of moving on from that, talking a little bit about impact and how foundations measure impact and work with their grantees in doing so. So I'd just like to open up the discussion from there. Are you opening this one? Yeah. So we're going to continue that discussion after a 15-minute break outside. So we invite you for some coffee and tea and just take a little bit break, and then we'll continue with the discussion afterwards. That's what I thought.